one time, all the people of the world spoke the same language and used the same words. As the people migrated to the east, they found a plain in the land of Babylonia and settled there. They began saying to each other, "Let's make bricks and harden them with fire." In this region, bricks were used instead of stone, and tar was used for mortar. Then they said, "Come, let's build a great city for ourselves, with a tower that reaches into the sky. This will make us famous and keep us from being scattered all over the world." But the Lord came down to look at the city and the tower the people were building. "Look," he said, "the people are united and they all speak the same language. After this, nothing they set out to do will be impossible for them. Come, let's go down and confuse the people with different languages. Then they won't be able to understand each other." In that way, the Lord scattered them all over the world, and they stopped building the city. That is why the city was called Babel, because that is where the Lord confused the people with different languages. In this way, he scattered them all over the world. This is the account of Shem's family. 2 years after the great flood, when Shem was 100 years old, he became the father of Arphaxad. After the birth of Arphaxad, Shem lived another 500 years and had other sons and daughters. When Arphaxad was 35 years old, he became the father of Shelah. After the birth of Shelah, Arphaxad lived another 403 years and had other sons and daughters. When Shelah was 30 years old, he became the father of Eber. After the birth of Eber, Shelah lived another 403 years and had other sons and daughters. And when Eber was 34 years old, he became the father of Peleg. After the birth of Peleg, Eber lived another 430 years and had other sons and daughters. When Peleg was 30 years old, he became the father of Roi. After the birth of Roi, Peleg lived another 209 years and had other sons and daughters. When Roi was 32 years old, he became the father of Serug. After the birth of Serug, Reu lived another 207 years and had other sons and daughters. When Serug was 30 years old, he became the father of Nahor. After the birth of Nahor, Serug lived another 200 years and had other sons and daughters. When Nahor was 29 years old, he became the father of Terah. After the birth of Terah, Nahor lived another 119 years and had other sons and daughters. After Terah was 70 years old, he became the father of Abram, Nahor, and Haran. This is the account of Terah's family. Terah was the father of Abram, Nahor, and Haran was the father of Lot. But Haran died in Ur of the Chaldeans, the land of his birth, while his father Terah was still living. Meanwhile, Abram and Nahor both married. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife was Milcah. Milcah and her sister Iscah were daughters of Nahor's brother Haran. But Sarai was unable to become pregnant and had no children. One day Terah took his son Abram, his daughter-in-law Sarai, his son Abram's wife, and his grandson Lot, his son Haran's child, and moved away from Ur of the Chaldeans. He was headed for the land of Canaan, but they stopped at Haran and settled there. Terah lived for 205 years and died while still in Haran.
Welcome to the Deep Dive, listeners.
Always.
Ready to dive in.
Oh.
Today, we're tackling a story that's, well, pretty famous one. It's the Tower of Babel.
Classic.
We're going to be looking at Genesis chapter 11. But, and this is key, not just the tower story itself.
Oh, I like where this is going. Deeper, huh?
Exactly. We're going to be looking at the genealogy that's wrapped around it, too. All those names and ages. Because, frankly, that's where some real hidden
People
stuff
tend to
is.
gloss over those genealogies, but they're like treasure troves of historical and cultural insight, you know? Can't understand the story without them.
Right. Okay, so picture this. Post-flood, everyone's speaking the same language, right?
Yeah.
And then, bam, out of the blue, they decide to build this city with this tower, this massive tower that's supposed to reach
Ambitious,
the heavens.
to say the least.
Yeah, understatement. What's the deal with that? What's driving that
Well,
kind
you
of
have to
ambition,
remember,
do you think?
the ancient mindset It wasn't exactly like ours. This is where connecting the story to ziggurats is so important. Ziggurats were these massive structures built in ancient Mesopotamia. They were more than just tall buildings, though.
Right, right. I've seen
They were
pictures. They're
considered sacred
incredible.
spaces, bridges between the earthly and the divine. So think about it. The Tower of Babel, maybe it was inspired by those structures. Maybe it symbolizes that human desire to, well, literally reach the heavens, but also to forge their own path to the divine, to connect on their own terms.
So it wasn't just about, like, touching the clouds. It was about, I don't know, reaching a higher power.
Exactly. And that's where things get interesting. Because that ambition, that desire for, let's say, a direct line to the divine, it's presented as a real challenge in the text, almost like humanity was saying, we got this. We don't need you. We can reach you ourselves.
And that's where God steps in, right? Confounds their language, scatters them across the earth, a bit of a, whoa, hold on
Yeah,
there
you could say
moment.
that.
I've always wondered, though, about the languages themselves. What do we actually know? Like, was it poof, instant new languages, or is there a different
Well,
way
that's
to
where things
understand
get
it?
really interesting, linguistically speaking. Some scholars believe that the story might reflect how people back then understood language change, how it happens over time. It wouldn't have been instant, not really, but the story, it kind of dramatizes that power of language divergence,
Hmm.
how it can cause misunderstandings, how it can divide people, even lead to conflict.
Hmm.
Powerful stuff, still relevant.
Yeah, it makes you think, for sure. It really is. It's amazing how these themes, ambition, language, they still resonate today. But before we go too far down that road, I got to ask about something that's, I don't know, always kind of thrown me, and that's the genealogies, the ones right after the Tower of Babel story. I mean, they're super detailed, all those names and ages, but I got to admit, at first glance, they seem, well, a little dry, even for a
Yeah, I
deep
get it. They
dive.
can seem a little overwhelming at first, but trust me, once you dig in, they're anything but dry. Think about it. These aren't
Really?
just like family trees. They're historical records, cultural artifacts. They're packed with information about how ancient Hebrews viewed time, lineage, their whole place in the grand scheme of things.
Okay, now that you mention it, grand scheme, that's interesting. Are you saying there's a bigger reason, a bigger meaning behind these lists of names and how long these
Absolutely.
people
Take the
lived?
lifespans, for instance, Genesis 11, right? We're talking hundreds of years. Now, whether you take those literally or look at them symbolically, they tell us something about how differently ancient people thought about time. Like, they valued longevity, experience, wisdom passed down through generations. It connected them to their past in a way we can barely imagine.
That's a really cool way to look at it. Each generation wasn't just like another link in the chain, but this library of knowledge, of tradition. I do have to ask though, how do those long lifespans, even symbolically, connect to the whole Tower of Babel
Well,
story?
that's where the structure of the genealogy is key. It traces a direct line from Shem. He was one of Noah's sons, right? It goes from Shem all the way down to Abram. Later on, he becomes Abraham.
Wait, so this is the same Abraham, the central figure in Judaism, Christianity, and
That's the
Islam.
one. And that's what makes this genealogy so powerful. It's the bridge between the Tower of Babel, the story of ambition and scattering, and the beginning of this covenant with God, the story of a chosen people. It suggests that even after all that chaos, there's a continuation, a purpose moving through generations.
It's like after the scattering, all the confusion, the genealogy comes in and says, okay, but here's the plan. Here's how it's going to work. It's almost like this message of hope, of maybe even redemption.
Exactly. It's subtle, but it's definitely there. And it reminds us that these ancient stories, we can't just read them in isolation. They're all part of a bigger tapestry, a narrative that unfolds over generations. And that narrative, that's where things get really interesting when we start thinking about the legacy of the Tower of Babel in a modern context.
It's wild, right? I mean, ambition, language, legacy, these threads running through what, thousands of years from this ancient tower to, well, us right here. But how do we, and I mean all of us listening, connect these, I don't know, ancient docs to our lives now? What's the takeaway? What does the Tower of Babel have to say to us today?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's funny in a way how these stories, they still speak to us. Like the tower itself, it's a reminder, isn't it? Ambition going too far can backfire, big time.
It's like that old saying, Careful what you wish for.
Exactly. I mean, think about it. That kind of ambition, we see it everywhere. The way we're always pushing technology, the whole global political scene, it's like this need to be bigger, better. It's just, I don't know, part of us. But the Tower of Babel, it's a good reminder to maybe stop and think about the cost. What are we risking? Division, chaos.
It's about finding that balance, I guess. Wanting to progress, but not at the expense of, well, each other. And speaking of that, we can't forget the whole language thing, or maybe more like the challenges when communication falls apart. I think we've all been there.
Oh, for sure. And that scattering, all those different languages, it's presented as this punishment, right? But it also speaks to something pretty amazing. Diversity, all those different ways of expressing ourselves, the world we live in, all those languages and cultures. You could say it started right there with the tower.
Variety is the spice of life. Right. But on a global scale.
Yeah.
Although it does make things, well, complicated. Miscommunication, misunderstandings, it can even lead to conflict.
Absolutely. And figuring that out, navigating it all, it takes effort. Being willing to bridge those gaps, not just between languages, but between viewpoints. The Tower of Babel, it reminds us. Communication, really understanding each other, that takes work. It's listening, it's learning, finding that common ground.
Which, let's face it, we could all use a little more of these days, right?
Yeah.
Especially in a world where, what, communication is a tweet, a headline. It's a good reminder to slow down, to really listen, to actually engage with people, even when, especially when we disagree.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And let's not forget that other message, the one in those genealogies, the one that reminds us that we're all part of this bigger story, a lineage that goes way, way back. Just like those names in Genesis, our lives, our actions, they all have an impact. They create these ripples that go far beyond us.
It's kind of humbling when you put it that way, and kind of amazing. We're part of something so much bigger.
Exactly. And that brings us to a final thought, something for everyone to think about. We've been talking about communication, about ambition, about our shared history. So here's the question. How can we, each of us, build bridges instead of towers? How do we strive for great things without losing sight of our connection to each other, to the generations that come after us? How do we make sure our ambitions benefit everyone?
Now, those are some deep dive worthy questions. Proof that these stories, even after all this time, they still matter. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive. Keep exploring, keep asking questions, and we'll see you next time.